I'm talking about having the plan for the universe. What Reisman is talking about is one element in that plan. So I don't think it's different in kind. It's just he's filling in the details of one part of that overall plan. But it is something from above which governs everything that takes place.
I don't understand how the fact that we don't understand how Hashem is functioning for our good applies to this verse.
Applies to?
This verse applies to L'Shem Shemo, applies to the phrase L'Shem Shemo. L'man Shemo.
I'm a soldier. I'm in a platoon of 100 people. We get the orders from the general, take that hill. I say, really? But the war's over there, and we're 100, and there's 500 enemy soldiers, we're going to get slaughtered, and so forth and so on. Somebody says, the general has his reasons. He's trying to win the war, and he knows what his resources are, and he has his reasons, right? That means he's got a plan, and he knows a lot more than I do, and just as I want to win the war, he also wants to win the war, and this is going to help to win the war. That's the picture of L'man Shemo, meaning he's the creator and sustainer of the whole universe, and he has his plan for the universe, and everything fits into that plan. All I have to know is that he has credibility and say, if he says so, then I can trust that it's true, even though I myself don't understand it. If I didn't have that, I would have to say, these things are out of control. They're just not serving any purpose. That's what I intended.
It fits into our.
So I think he's talking about a particular part of that because of Rachamim, because of mercy. I will overlook some of the things that the attribute of strict justice tells me to do, in order to maintain the existence and success of the system as a whole. That's a way of describing in more detail what that overall plan is. So I thought that, Rabbi Reisman and I were not coming from really different points of origin. And I'm happy to say that because I have a lot of respect for Rabbi Reisman. He's really a very important contributor, thinker. Okay, so we're sort of in the middle of the second blessing on page 100 or 101. All right, I'll leave it there. Let's go to the next one. The next one is very short and very difficult to understand. You are Kadosh, translated holy. Your name is Kadosh, and holy beings praise you every day. And then it says, blessed are you. And then here's the name of Aleph Lamed, which I mentioned to you before. HaKadosh, the holy. So let's start by taking a little thing. We say you are and your name is. What's the difference between saying you are and your name is? Well, the idea of name, it has different uses, but one standard use is a name is a way of referring to and thinking about something. We use names. A name is a piece of language with which we can talk about things because the name denotes, indicates, refers to the thing. So when you use the name, you're able to talk about and say things about an object. Now, if you look at it from the point of view of the user of the name, the thing is there. The name is my tool for relating to it. The name is part of my world. So when we talk about Hashem's name, I'm saying one thing out of 10, and I'm saying it superficially, but when we talk about Hashem's name, we have what Hashem is to me, for me, what role he plays in my world that I can understand, which is much different from what he is. What he is for me, what I understand of him, is an infinitesimally small slice of what he really is. So, we're saying two things. When we say that his name is holy, what we're saying is that holiness, whatever holiness is, I'll have to explain that in Yis Hashem, is something that's part of what I understand about him, what he shows me about him. But then, when I say you are holy, I mean to say the holiness isn't exhausted by the little slice that I have. The holiness really rests in the totality of Hashem's being, which I don't have access to. So I don't want to limit the assertion of holiness just to what I grasp. That would be a gross misrepresentation of the circumstances. So I start off the source, Kodesh Baruch Hu in his essence is holy, and I am also, what I perceive of Hashem is holy. Now when it says holy beings praise him every day, there are two interpretations of that. One is angels, and the other is people who have achieved holiness. And I don't think you have to choose between the two interpretations. I think the words here encompass both of them. And there's a categorical difference between the two. Let's take an angel. An angel is created holy. Holiness is part of his essence, the level and type of holiness that applies to angels. Human being is created with the potential to achieve holiness. So it's a human being's achievement to be holy. Those are two different realities. And when I look at the world and I take lesson and inspiration from it, I get two different terms of source. The angel, who's not embodied within the limitations of a physical existence, the holiness that God projects into the angel is a very high level, very pure level of holiness. So, when the angels say, Kadosh, 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 Hashem Tzvakos, Mloch ha'aretz kvodo, holy, holy, holy is Hashem of hosts, whatever that means, the whole is full of his glory. Every time we recite that verse, we're saying what the angels say. We always say it in the name of the angels. The implication is, we could never get to that on our own. If that wasn't revealed to us, we would never get to it on our own. We would never be able to achieve that kind of insight. So when I say it, I'm saying, listen, I know my limitations. I'm saying it because they say it. I learned it from them. That's why I'm able to say it. But that's because they were created with a certain pure and high level of holiness. When a human being achieves holiness for himself and praises God, that praise now speaks to my reality directly. He did something which I could have done myself. He did something which I have done partially myself. So I can relate to where it's coming from in him. I get a very different kind of inspiration when I hear the praises of someone who's living my life than I get when I get from something that's living a very, very different life, though higher and superior in certain respects. So the bracha here says, holy ones praise you. I think both of the interpretations contribute to a more global understanding that it's angels and people who have achieved holiness for themselves. That's the scaffolding. But what about the word holy? What does that mean? Here there's a difficult problem, and I think that the beginnings of the solution, as far as I can get, are found in the Kabbalistic sources, and I'll explain it to you at least in light terms. Lots and lots of things are holy. The Temple Mount is holy, the city of Jerusalem is holy, and the land of Israel is holy. And Torah scrolls are holy. Tefillah and mezuzos, the parchments in them are holy. And something that's used for a sacrifice, an animal can be holy, a cup of wine can be holy, A cup of water can be holy in some cases. Grain, oil, all those things can be holy. People can be holy. And in two ways. The Jewish people are given a certain holiness by their creation, by God. And then people, as we said before, can achieve holiness through the way they live their lives. So people can be holy. Wow, there's a large variety of things that can be holy. Is there one concept that applies to all of them that would express their holiness? There is. Holiness means this item, let's say Q, is holy because it is dedicated to something above it, something which has in itself its own inherent holiness. And because it's dedicated to that thing that's above it, that creates certain restrictions on ways in which it can be used, certain prohibitions in the ways in which it can be used. So the Temple Mount is dedicated to being the place of the temple and the outskirts of the temple. And that being the case, that's what it should be used for, and it should be used for anything else. And the city of Jerusalem, there are certain things, certain mitzvos that you do, lifnei Hashem, which means you're sitting in Hashem's presence, and that means the city has certain restrictions, what can and cannot be done there. And the land of Israel has holiness, so its crops have a certain holiness because they grow out of the holiness of the land of Israel. And therefore, its crops have certain prohibitions. It can be only can be used in certain ways. A Sefer Torah can only be used for its own purpose, and items like a Sefer Torah, other physical items, which have holiness, if you sell it, the money can only be used for something of equal or greater holiness. So the holiness there dictates its function, and also dictates the way it can be used economically. So holiness, in general, means the thing is attached to something above it, and that attachment gives it a special purpose, a function, and that function creates certain prohibitions in the way it can be otherwise used. The colossal problem that arises now is, what am I supposed to mean when I say that God is holy? This sounds like a disaster. God is attached to something higher than God, and because it's attached to something higher than God, therefore God has a special purpose, and therefore there are restrictions and so forth and so on. That doesn't sound right. It definitely sounds wrong. It doesn't sound like it's a possible thought, and it isn't a possible thought. So now there's the fork in the road. You can say, well, what makes you think that holiness for a human being or a piece of parchment or an animal or wine or oil would be the same as holiness for the Creator? Why should they be the same concept? And I have a certain sympathy with that. We certainly don't mean to be able to compare everything about our lives with the Creator. So somebody said, look, for him it's a different concept. I couldn't rule that out. But for the unity of Jewish thinking, it would be good. It would be good if we could create a single concept. And it's not only holy; there are various other concepts which are applied to Kodesh Baruch Hu and applied to people, at least. And we have definitions which apply to people. And again, it's not an obvious connection to say how it applies to a Kodesh Baruch Hu. So Gibor, mighty. It says in Pirkei Avos, Gibor HaKovish es Yitzro. What does it mean to be mighty? It means to conquer your own spirit. Wow. Conquer your own spirit. So here's where Havdalah's Uncle Sigmund makes an appearance. Sigmund Freud. He says, I told you that you're a committee, didn't I? So ever since Freud, what's going on inside a human being is a committee. The ego, the superego, and the id, or other fundamental principles. The idea of understanding a human being as a committee is really pushed by certain natural things we say about people, which are hard to understand otherwise. So we tend to say about a person, he's self-deceived, fooling himself. Really? Let's see. What does it mean to deceive someone? It means, I know the truth, but I'm going to tell him something which misleads him into thinking something else so that what he believes isn't true. Isn't that what deception is? The deceiver knows the truth. So could you really deceive yourself? Could you play the role of deceiver and deceived simultaneously? Answer, no, there's two of you, or 20. There are various different features of you, and one feature can deceive the other feature. Yeah, okay, I hear that. That could be. That certainly could be. So for human beings, if the great person is the one who conquers his own spirit, you can't be the conqueror and the conquered simultaneously, can you? So then it's got to be part A that conquers part B. And that means, because they're both elements in your identity, you could speak of you conquering yourself, but they're different elements in your identity because conquering is an asymmetrical relationship. A conquers B, B's not conquering A, and A isn't conquering itself. It's not a reflexive relationship. So that's what we say about people. Now the problem is going to be, going to say that about God, about the Creator? God is a committee? Don't we believe in God's unity? I think there's a prayer called the Shema, if I remember correctly, which ends with the word Echad. And that's supposed to be this grand statement of Jewish monotheism. What do you mean God's a committee? And the answer is that according to the most fundamental and widespread Kabbalistic doctrines, when we talk about God, we are talking about a committee. That doesn't mean he's a committee, but it means when we talk about God, we talk about a committee. Because we don't talk about what God is, we talk about what God does. I've spoken to you about Maimonides in the guide, part 1, chapter 54. We spoke about this many times. And the Kabbalah categorizes, analyzes what God does, and analyzes it into principles. And then it turns out that when you use the name of God, the implicit question from the Kabbalistic point of view is, which one? Now, not which God, but which divine principle are we talking about? Because we as humans talking about God can only talk about the divine principles. We can't get beyond that. So now, if I say, you are Kadosh, and Kadosh means whatever I'm talking about is related to something higher than it, and because it's related to it, it thereby achieves a certain purpose that's important, and then in that way, there are certain restricted ways in which you can deal with the lower thing because of the relationship to the higher thing. Since I'm not talking about the one, infinite, transcendent creator of everything, I'm only talking about the principles of action. You can ask, which principle of action are you talking about? And what one above is it relating to? And in what way does it embody or work or carry out the purposes of the one above? And what does that imply about the way the one below is to be treated? And that's exactly what's done. Exactly what's done. We have a phrase in Hebrew, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be He. The Ramchal, I call him a great philosopher, is also, of course, obviously a great Kabbalist. My oldest son showed me in one of his letters, they have in one of the green books a selection of the Kabbalistic portions of letters that he wrote. They leave out the personal portions, but when he put Kabbalistic ideas into the letters, they excerpted them, and he showed me where the Ramchal there says, Kadosh means Bo Kodesh. There's something called Kodesh, which you could loosely think of as holiness, and to be holy means it has Kodesh in it. So the lower one is the Kadosh, the higher one is Kodesh, and the lower one is called Kadosh because of the way it relates to the higher one. Those who know about Spheros and Partsufim, that's really what's going on. So when you say that something is holy, Kadosh, in your mind you see this thing that you say is Kadosh as related to something above it. And that relationship creates a certain character for the one below, and then dictates how you interact with the one below. So the same structure applies to, now listen carefully, applies to what we say about the Kodesh Baruch Hu as to what we say about a human being when we say a human being is holy. Of course, what we say is not what the ultimate reality is, because we can't talk about the ultimate reality. So the Kabbalah enables us to make a single definition to apply to both the human identity and what we say about God. Same thing's true with Gibor. Kovish is Yitzro. Sometimes the different principles of action contradict one another. In a particular case, let's take the terms that we've been speaking now for several days. Let's take loving kindness and strict justice. We spoke about the fact that they can contradict one another. Strict justice would say that such a person hasn't earned anything for the world to come, and therefore should just simply just be annihilated and disappear. And loving kindness says, no, I'm not doing that. That's why I put in mercy. Right? So loving kindness doesn't tolerate that strict justice outcome. Well, then there's a struggle between the two of them, isn't there? Then we say when Koveshes Yisrael means you conquer your own spirit, and conquer your own spirit means there's a committee, and there's A and B, and A conquers B, and it's you conquering your own spirit because A and B are both parts of you. So it's an internal struggle, so to speak. You have that in the way we describe God. Not in God, but the way we describe God has principles. Sometimes the principles contradict in a particular case, and sometimes one overpowers the other one. Very often, maybe even, I would say, to a certain extent, almost all the time, loving kindness is held back by strict justice because pure loving kindness will simply overwhelm and destroy the entire project. So it has to be held back, it has to be filtered, it has to be diluted. So that's the gvura, the greatness, the power that's being exercised to hold back full-fledged, undiluted loving kindness, which will swamp the whole project that we're engaged in. So that being the case, we can call God Gibor, we call God Kadosh, using the same structure that we use when we use with respect to human beings. That's skimming the very surface. Okay? And the name of God here is the Aleph Lamed name, and I told you that one meaning of Aleph Lamed is power, just raw power, and it's associated more directly with, that's what I wanted to ask him, I forgot. It's associated with great power of loving kindness, and that's now what the holiness is applied to. The holiness is applied to Kel, Aleph Lamed. That means the highest expression of a Kodesh Baruch Hu in the world, which is loving kindness. That's where the holiness lies, which is a very good connection. Okay, that's a short, superficial introduction to that blessing. By the way, there's a Kabbalistic sefer called Shari Ora, one of the early Kabbalists, and he writes it to a friend, and he says, we're all praying to a Kodesh Baruch Hu, and we use names of God and descriptions of God. Prayer is intended to be a way of interacting with certain essential features of the way God presents himself. I'm writing a book for you so you'll know how to pray. You'll know what they mean. You'll know what to think about, what to intend when you're saying the words. So and it's a very beautiful book. It's not too difficult to read even. But and there is an English translation. I'm not recommending it because it's really Kabbalistic, but it's not too technical Kabbalistic. And there he goes through the names and the other descriptions of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and he says what they are, because that's one of the things you want to do. You want to have in mind what these phrases mean. Yeah.
The Rabbi said that the Kadosh, when attributed to Hashem, is in loving kindness, but it's not defined in the same way that the Rabbi defined when it's in things.
No, not defined. I didn't say. I said loving kindness is where holiness resides. It doesn't say that A resides in B. It doesn't mean they're identical.
Mm-hmm. You can't define it in the same way you could define holiness in a cup of water or an animal or a sefer Torah.
Well, again, if we're talking about a particular mode of operation, and we call it kadosh, what we're saying is there's something above it and relates to the thing above it, and in that relationship it takes on a certain role, and that role requires us to deal with it in a particular way. So that's what the Kabbalists will say about this. We're not talking about the Creator, capital C. We're talking about a specific mode of action. Okay. Now, I want to just point out one other thing about language, which the Ramchal points out in that passage, and people are typically not aware of. The word here is kadosh. There is another word, kodesh. I mentioned that when I quoted the Ramchal. Kodesh and kadosh are not the same. Kodesh is a noun, It's close to something like holiness. And kadosh is an adjective, holy, a thing that's holy. Well, we have in Hebrew the phrase hakadosh baruch hu, and in Aramaic we have kudsha baruch hu. They aren't the same, because kudsha in Aramaic is kodesh in Hebrew, and the kadosh baruch hu is kadosh, so they aren't the same. They aren't saying the same thing. The one is the higher, and the other one is the lower. Kodesh is the higher, kudsha in Aramaic is the higher, and kadosh is the lower. So that's something to just be aware of. Okay, now come the petitions, of which there used to be 12. There used to be used to be there are 13 now because there are 19 blessings. There used to be 12 because there were 18. And this particular, the first one, starts with a statement of fact. Double statement of fact. You graciously endow man, Adam, with das, and you teach Enosh Bina. And then comes the petition. Graciously endow from you, endow us from you, three things. This is the Ashkenazi version. They are Bina Haskel, whatever they are, we'll talk about that. And then comes the ending of the blessing. So there's a Maharal in several places, which I've been learning recently, who points out, if you look at most of the other blessings in this section, they start with petitions. The next one is bring us back, our Father, to your Torah. The next one is forgive us, our Father. The next one is see our sufferings. The next one is heal us. The next one is bless on our behalf this year. The next one is sound the great shofar. The next one is restore our judges. For the slanderers, let them be no hope. On the righteous, give your mercies. All of them are petitions. This one doesn't start with a petition. It starts with a statement of fact. So he says that it's crucial here to have a statement of fact, and that's one of the reasons why it's put at the beginning of the of the petitions, because it follows three blessings, word statements of fact. So linguistically, it fits. It's a continuation of statements of fact. And the first function is das. The first thing that's stated is das. And the closing of the blessing is das. So das is really the focus, although there are other things mentioned. But das, and of the things, the intellectual gifts that are mentioned in this blessing, das is mentioned 3 times. One times is dea, but it's das 3 times. And Bina is mentioned twice, and Haskell is mentioned once. So really this is about das. Now, the Gemara quotes the greatness of das because it occurs between 2 of God's names. Kael Deos Hashem. So the Gemara gives 2 reasons why the petitions start with this concept of das. One is because it's something very august, something very, very great, because it occurs between 2 names of Hashem. And also because you need das in order to know how to reform your actions and to ask for mercy from Hashem and to understand all the other things that you are doing in the Shemona Esrei. That's why it goes as a precondition. And the Maharal says there aren't 2 separate reasons. The one is the basis for the other. The reason it comes first as a basis for all the others because it's between the 2 names. And he says, if you look carefully at the text, you will see that at the second line of this page, you have Hakel HaKadosh. Look at that. That's the name Aleph Lamed. And then, At the end of the fourth line, when you come to the end of the blessing, you have the name Yod and a Hey and a Vav and a Hey. And those are the two names between which the word Das appears in the verse which says that Das is between two names. So that works out extremely nicely. Kel Deus Hashem. Okay, now let's try to get a little bit of a grasp of these different characteristics. And by the way, there's a puzzle here which I can't really solve. I've asked a number of people, I didn't get any answer. Other versions of this blessing, certain Hasidic versions, have Chochmah, Bina, and Das, leaving out Haskel. I will explain to you what Chochmah is also. And then you have 4 characteristics, and no version has all 4. So something's going on here, because they're all genuine. No one thinks that one of the versions doesn't exist or isn't important. But the 2 versions have only 3, and Bina and Das are in both versions, and the others differ, but one has Chochmah and the other has Haskel. I think it's a terrific question. I don't have an answer for it. So, yeah.
Yeah, but also, I just noticed, like, Chochmah comes before Das in those versions, and Haskel comes after Bina. Just like a placement of the Chochmah comes before Chochmah Bina B'das.
Yes, that's right. That's quite true. And the Maharal talks about that. Talks about the order. So that's quite complicated. So let's try to figure out a little bit. And these words are very flexible, and they mean different things in different contexts. But here's one way to understand it. Chochmah is when you grasp something, and you have what we call an intuitive grasp, and it is before it's expressed in words. Now, I grew up at a period of history where there was a prejudice against this type of idea. All understanding is in words, all knowledge is in words, and if you can't speak the words, then you don't really understand it. That was a deep, deep prejudice that was very common in those times, and this is dreadfully wrong, and they could have known better if they had thought more carefully about the lives that they were leading. Let me just give you a couple of indications of this. Have you ever searched for words to express what you're thinking? And you think, maybe it's X, Y, Z. That doesn't capture it. And then somebody says, maybe it's PQR. You think, no, not really. And then somebody says, maybe it's ABC. And you think, ABC. That's it. That's what I meant to say. Now tell me, did you have the thought before you had the words? Mm-hmm. If you didn't have a thought, how did you know that X, Y, Z and PQR were wrong and ABC was right? If you didn't have a thought. Obviously you had a thought. You're matching the words to your thought, and you're seeing whether the words do justice to the thought. So obviously you had a thought. Furthermore, there are many things that people know about the world that they cannot put into words. Why do you say that person is anxious rather than depressed? I'll tell you why. Because he looks anxious. That's why he looks anxious. Yeah, but how do you know? Look, I'm 47 years old. I've been hanging around people for a long time. I've been trained in psychology. I know that look. That's an anxious look. It's not a depressed look. Tell me what it means. How many degrees of frown are in the lips, and how much, what color is the skin, and how much tension is in the eyebrows. Listen, either you get it or you don't. Either you see it or you don't. There's nothing more to say. There was a time, I guess it happens in the 70s. I had a friend who was working at the Applied Physics Lab of Hopkins, where they made bombs and all tracking and military things. And he told me they had a problem with submarines. Because a submarine has a sonar scope, it sends out sound waves, and then they bounce back, and they use that to see what's in front of them in the water. And the problem was there's certain schools of fish that look like submarines. Well, you don't want to waste your torpedo on a school of fish. That's just wasteful. So you're sitting there looking at this at sonoscope, and you get this image, and you have to tell the guy, fire, don't fire. It's very hard to tell the difference. At that time, there were two people in the Navy who could reliably tell the difference. They look at it and say, yeah, fire, because it's a submarine. No, don't fire, it's fish. And then one died. Well, you can't have it on all the submarines. So the Navy thought of a solution. They asked them to describe it. Wasn't that clever of them? Tell us what you see. And the answer they got was, well, the fish look like fish, and the submarines look like submarines. They're just different. They couldn't put into words what they saw, but they were reliable because you could test them. You can give them pictures of submarines and pictures of fish and see whether they get it right, and they got it right every time. So a great deal of what you know without being able to put it into words. Wittgenstein wrote about the inability to define things. You define table, your definition will not pick out the new creation from scan. It'll be a new thing, and you'll intuitively say, oh yeah, that's also a table, but it won't fit your definition because you have to anticipate that that creation. The grasp of how to prove things in mathematics. Gödel's theorem showed that you can't have a recipe for proving things in mathematics. You can't have a set of rules to tell you how to prove things in mathematics. And yet some people are very good at it, and some people are impossible at it. This guy says, yeah, we'll do it with Fourier analysis. That's how we'll do it. And then he works it out and he gets it. And other people look at it and say, I don't know where to go. I don't know what to do. The difference between them isn't that he's got words in his head and they don't have words in their heads. Niels Bohr, one of the great founders of quantum mechanics, was working on a very, very difficult problem, and he reports he was in London, he got the answer stepping off a bus. It took him 3 days to write it down, but he saw it. He saw the answer. He didn't have words yet. It took him 3 days to find the words. So a lot of our understanding is, let's say, non-linguistic, and in some cases that we could call it pre-linguistic, because sometimes it can be expressed in words. Chachma is a pre-linguistic understanding, grasp, insight into something. Bina creates categories from the word bain, which means to distinguish between things. Bina is the source of language. Language uses words and concepts which have contours. The fundamental idea of a concept is there's some things that are classified under the concept and other things which are external to the concept, or at least can be external to the concept. It draws a line somewhere. So Bina is the process of taking that grasp of Chachma and putting it into words so it can be communicated. And our Sforim say you never succeed in capturing the totality of the grasp. It's a rendering of part of the content, and the content spins off linguistic corollaries and is richer than just the linguistic corollaries. For those of you who know, it's not lifting Mishura Sadin. The din is the laws that are written in the book, and so where you go beyond what the literal law requires of you to do something extra that's valuable. Now, if you could write down what lifting Mishura Sadin meant, then it would be another din. It's an intuition which spawns other rules when circumstances come up, and you can see that this is something that is appropriate. But it, in and of itself, isn't put into words. In fact, I should mention to you the Ramban here. This is a really fundamental Ramban, and also a little bit shocking. He talks about this, lifting Mishur Sadin. He talks about it on the pasuk in Dvarim, I think it's Perek Vav. Yasisa hayashav atov bein Hashem Elokecha. Should do what is straight and good in Hashem's eyes. So Ramban says, look, I have a Torah with 613 commandments. Okay, is this a 614th commandment? Something else to do? But it isn't, because there's 613. Well, is this a repetition of one of the other 613? Why would there be a verse repeating something in the other 613? And the Ramban says the same thing about in Parshas Kedoshim to you, be holy. He says, what is that? Is that another commandment above and beyond all the other commandments? And if it isn't, what is the verse telling me? And in both cases, he gives the same explanation, and he cross-references them. And this is his explanation. The Torah prescribes for you what it wants you to do on a two-level process. The first level is laws. The laws are precise, rigorous, defined, analyzed. But then the Torah says, don't be satisfied with just fulfilling all the laws. At this point, I want to collapse. Just fulfilling all the laws isn't enough, hey? I think I'd be very happy if I thought I fulfilled all the laws. No! Don't be satisfied with that. Extend yourself beyond all the laws to do extra what is right and good. You'll ask me, why didn't the Kodesh Baruch Hu write everything down in the laws? And he says, it's not possible. It's not possible to have all of what the Kodesh Baruch Hu wants you to do written down. And the reason it's in two different verses is because in the verse in Deuteronomy, when it says to do what's Yashar and Tov, it's talking about your interpersonal relations. And he says it's impossible to have a set of rules which govern every interaction you have with another person. And also, in your personal life, that's what be holy is. It's impossible to write down a complete set of rules for how to live a holy life. So at this point, I think to myself, what are you talking about? This book was written by the creator of the universe. You're saying it's impossible for him to write it down? Really? What would that mean? I think the right answer is, well, he could write it down, but it would have 13 trillion pages. And we wouldn't be able to do anything with it. He can't write it down for us. The way our minds are constructed, we're not able to receive the information in that fashion. So says the Ramban, in both cases, because Baruch Hu gave us a bedrock of absolute minimum of laws that have to be kept, and then also told us to stretch ourselves beyond what the laws strictly require. Well, that understanding of how to do that, according to Ramban, isn't another verbal principle. Because if it were, it could be added to the laws. So he's telling you that there is a certain grasp that isn't, in our case, put into language, and he's saying it isn't possible to put it into language. And I'll give you one more example, because I think it's a really fundamental category. We had this year we on Rosh Hashanah, we didn't blow shofar. Why didn't we do that? Why didn't we blow shofar? The answer, according to the Bavli, which is our answer, is this. Maybe someone is going to be so concerned to do the mitzvah appropriately that he'll want to take his shofar to an expert. And either the expert will tell him how to blow it, which I think is what the Gersh is, or give it to the expert and he'll blow it. And in so doing, he'll carry his shofar through a public domain, which is forbidden on Shabbos. And he'll thereby inadvertently violate Shabbos. That's the problem. We're not blowing shofar because maybe someone will inadvertently violate Shabbos. So let's weigh these things up. On the one hand, you have the mitzvah of shofar, deraisa, for the whole nation. On the other hand, you have the possibility, not known that someone will carry it to a public domain, the possibility that someone will violate Shabbos and violate it inadvertently, osek b'dvar mitzvah, in the least serious possible way. Who says which is more important? Who says that you should eliminate the whole biblical mitzvah of shofar for the whole people of Israel for this year? Second day is only rabbinic. Versus, in order to protect Shabbos, versus go the other way. Blow the shofar and take the chance that someone will violate Shabbos. Who says which is more important? There's no principle of Jewish law that dictates which way you should go. It's a judgment. What some people call it, it's a judgment call. You take what you know, you take what you understand, you take your acquaintance with living a life of Torah, and you use the sum total of your Torah, what you are in Torah, and you look at this issue and say, yeah, that's what has to be done. And it's not regarded as arbitrary. It's not regarded as prejudicially subjective. It's regarded as a judgment. Now, different people can disagree about judgments, but it's not arbitrary. It's not just I feel good about it until it feels otherwise. It's a judgment based on all factors. But these factors obviously can't be put into words. No one has ever tried to put them into words. So all of this means that in general life, in general philosophy, they have come now since the 50s. They've come to understand that a lot of understanding is not verbal, and in Torah, a lot of understanding is not verbal. And therefore, when you go from Chachma to Bina, Bina can express certain aspects of the Chachma. And that's why our Sfarim say that the Chachma grasp cannot be communicated to someone else. Bina captures certain aspects of its content, but the totality of the Chachma grasp cannot be communicated to someone else. Yeah?
Somebody's talking to other people who are his peers, and he has some concept that he has only grasped in his Chachma. He can't really communicate it. Is it possible for him to expect them to accept his decision without him being able to communicate anything to them about his?
I don't think so. And in fact, we have an actual concrete case of that. The Gemara says that Rabbi Meir was so superior to his contemporaries that if he would, there'd be a question about how to decide, and he would argue the pro side, he would be able to convince everybody the pro side was correct. But then, tomorrow, he can argue the con side and convince everybody that the con side is correct. And because of that, they didn't paskin like him, because they couldn't understand him. Whatever side he was taking at the moment sounded completely convincing to them. But they know that yesterday he said the opposite, it was just as convincing, which means he's coming from a much richer grasp of the subject than any of them had. He couldn't communicate that richer grasp to him. And when you're on the Sanhedrin, you have to vote your own understanding. You're not allowed to vote because somebody else voted. You're not allowed to use that. That's not the procedure in the Sanhedrin. So yes, and when you're voting on the Sanhedrin, you have to vote according to what you understand. Even in a case where you might know that your conclusion is wrong. That's the famous case where the Baskol, the voice of heaven, said that Rabbi Lezer's right, and they voted against it anyway. And the answer is because HaKadosh Baruch Hu wrote in the Torah, Lo b'shamayim hi. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wrote the Torah is not in heaven. So a voice from heaven, though the voice from heaven is correct, can't be used in a legal process of arriving at a decision, and therefore they voted against it because the legal procedure is to vote according to what you understand. I was thinking about giving a whole shiur on the difference between logic and law. There are times when, if you had to make a decision what to do, you would say one thing, and the law dictates a different thing. But law is part of an internal project, and it supersedes that kind of logic. Logic that you use in law is the logic of explaining and applying the legal principles, not justifying or criticizing the legal principles. They come from someplace else. When you try abstract logic against the legal principle, so then you often get a different answer, and in that case, law takes precedence. So that's here you have to vote your own understanding, even though you know that so and so in the Sanhedrin is smarter than you are, and knows more, and he's older than you are, and you think, God, disagreeing with him, it's almost certain that I'm wrong. But you have to vote your way anyway, because that's not what the Sanhedrin is for following somebody else's opinion. It's for having 72 different opinions represented in the voting procedure. I have 1 minute. Let me just tell you. This is the one I was going to use in that lecture. We have a phrase in the Gemara: "Ein safek motzi midei vadai." Have any of you heard that phrase? You've heard it. Okay. Is that a logical rule or a legal rule that's not logical? Let's see. I have something that's vadai. Then I have something that is a safek, it's doubtful. And what I'm told is that doubtful thing can't budge. The vadai, the one that I'm positive about, remains positive even in the face of the doubtful thing. So you hear it like that, and you think, Sure. I mean, surely certainty is much stronger than doubt. If you have to choose between something you're certain about and something you're doubtful about, you'll choose the one that you're certain about. But that's not how it's used. Let's take an object which is tummy. I need to put it in a mikveh. Okay, I have a pool of water. I put it into the pool of water, take it out, I tell somebody what I did, and he says, "You put it into that pool of water? Don't you know?" Don't I know what? Well, that pool goes up and down, Sometimes it's got more water, sometimes it's got less water. Half the time it's big enough to be a mikveh, and half the time it isn't. Did you measure the water? Did you pay attention to how much water is in it? Not really, I just put it into the water. Well, you don't know that you put it in a mikveh because maybe it wasn't a mikveh when you put it in. Okay, what should I say now? I took something that was definitely tameh, I put it into a pool. Maybe the pool was a kosher mikveh, and maybe it wasn't. What's the status of the object now? That would be logic, right? Maybe it was a mikveh, right? If it was a mikveh, it's tor. Or maybe it wasn't, in which case it's tameh. So the status of the object now is maybe it's tor, maybe it's tameh, depending upon how big the pool was. But ein suffik most b'dei vadai means when you apply the suffix to the vadai remains vadai. It doesn't budge, it doesn't change, it doesn't weaken. You say it was once definitely tameh. You put it into a suffix mikveh, it remains definitely tameh. That's not logical. Logic would say, having gone into a pool of water that might be a mikveh, the outcome should be 50-50 about whether it's tameh or Torah or not. That's not the outcome. This is a legal rule. It's not a logical rule. The Torah told us that's the way you're supposed to behave. So, and by the way, if you've heard of chazakah, that's where chazakah comes from. It had a cheskes tumah. The cheskes tumah is not taken away by a suffix. Suffix can't take away in this kind of case. At any rate, there are many, many cases like that where abstract logic will tell you one thing, and the halacha. And when you see a halacha that you think you have a complaint against, check what the legal rule is that governs the case, and you'll find that very often that's the answer to the objection. Anyway, that's a little introduction to Atachonim. We have to talk about. I didn't talk about Das yet, and I didn't talk about Haskell yet, and I didn't talk about the numbers. So we have more work to do on that blessing.